All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is Alonzo Trajan-Mora here, and I'm joined by Joe. Do you want to say hi, Joe? Joe DeBella?
Hey everyone, great
Yep.
to be talking to you guys virtually.
Right on. And we are part of the VMware Solution Architect team, specifically around VMware Cloud Management. And our topic of discussion today is going to be formerly known as vRealize. It's going to be Aria Operations. And specifically, the product that we're talking about today is the SaaS hosted option of Aria Operations, or what used to be called vRops. Now, why this is important is because SaaS actually has a lot of benefits to how we used to do things in the past, where vRops used to be hosted inside the data center. The actual appliance that did all of the work used to be hosted inside each individual data center. Now, what VMware's done is decided, rather than having all of the customers update the appliances themselves, go through the process of life cycling, handling availability themselves, VMware can actually host the appliance that is vRealize Operations and still monitor your on-prem data centers, or whether it's your cloud-hosted data centers, both of those in the same way, but where VMware's actually hosting as a SaaS service this appliance. So with that, as we mentioned, this is all part of the broader umbrella that is VMware Cloud Management. And so with that, one of the main areas that we're going to be focusing on is what are the steps to really get started with vRealize Operations, or what is now called Aria Operations. How do we get started with these different steps? And it's actually, we'll see, very straightforward. Joe's going to help us a lot with the actual demonstration of some of the platform pieces. But just to give a little bit of background over what the prereqs are, what are some of the initial steps? We'll want to make sure that we are interoperable. What I mean by that is Aria Operations, right, as we'll call it from now on, the SaaS platform requires certain versions of the vSphere or ESXi platform. Similarly with vSAN, NSX, Horizon, different VMware components. And we want to make sure that the versions of those products are compatible with our vRealize platform or Aria platform. The second is the prerequisite documentation. So there is VMware doc access for Aria Operations SaaS in the same way that we've had before for the on-premises appliances. And we'll want to look at those as part of what is required in order to communicate with the SaaS platform. The next step is going to be onboarding. So how do we access the SaaS service? And we'll touch a little bit on the cloud console, the cloud platform that we use to access all of these different SaaS services, and the onboarding process to get started with it. Then from there, actually getting ops connected, or our operations connected into our on-prem environment with a appliance, a lightweight OVA, or a virtual machine called a cloud proxy. That's what's going to actually make that communication between the SaaS platform that's hosted by VMware and your data center, whether that be on-prem or on some cloud hosted environment. The last thing is the platform configuration. So now that that communication is set up between the environment, how do we actually get the rest of the platform configured to properly collect information, and what are some considerations there? Now, the first part here, thank you, Joe, is interoperability matrix. Now, this is, as we see up top, interopmatrix.vmware.com. And this website right here is going to help us understand how do we support Operations Cloud with the other versions of our products, such as ESXi, vSAN, vCenter server itself, right? So the different versions, and which versions do we support communicating and connecting with vRealize Operations SaaS or Aria Operations SaaS. Now, we see that there aren't just a bunch of different versions on this list, right? There are in fact some that are no longer supported, whether that's because they independently are out of general support, or because testing has proven that we need to go to higher, more recent additions for the platform to work properly. So we'll want to make sure that this is absolutely compliant prior to us moving on to the next steps. Now, how do we actually get documentation and information on this platform operations? SaaS. And so here we see vRealize Operations. The naming is still in transition right into Aria, but essentially we have a bunch of different options, and you'll want to make sure that product version, as Joe just pointed out, is vRealize Operations Cloud. There are going to be other options there. Thank you, Joe. 8.6, 8.4, and so on. We'll want to make sure that cloud is selected. That's going to be the one that our docs team is focusing on for SaaS consumption. Now, one of these options out here on the left, and Joe's about to click on that tab, but on the left here of the column, we see Cloud Release Notes, Trial Experience, and there's one called Cloud Getting Started Guide. So how do we actually get started? Well, that's a great place to start. And here there's Before You Begin. Now, as we mentioned before, to actually get connected to vRealize Operations Cloud, there is going to need to be access to the cloud environment. We're going to then have a process for this, request for access, where you actually get access to that cloud environment and create an organization. The cloud portal that gives you access to the services, we'll go through that in a moment. Now, for the connection between the SaaS platform and your data center, that's going to require 443 outbound traffic from data center to SaaS platform with these 5 FQDNs whitelisted. And so your security teams, network teams, however you go about configuring your firewall specifically for FQDN whitelisting and 443 outbound access, you will want to make sure that this is enabled prior to going through this deployment process. A secondary thing to note is, since we will be deploying a lightweight virtual machine into the data center to broker that connection between the environment and the SaaS platform, we'll want to have an IP address ready to go, and a DNS record forward and reverse is typically recommended as well in order to help with that proxy, that virtual machine deployment. If we need more information as far as privileges, say for that particular deployment and that account that we're going to connect for vCenter purposes, there's also access to that right there where Joe highlighted. And so I'm going to pass it over to Joe in a moment here, just so that we can see a little more about getting started really with this trial and what the cloud console is going to look like.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, Alonzo, for going over some of the prerequisites. So once you've gone through that exercise of making sure that your environment is compatible, you have the appropriate interoperabilities with your vCenter environment, with your NSX environment, or whatever other VMware technologies you have, we're ready to start the actual deployment process. Now, I understand that for many of you who are listening to this, you're probably going to be interested in trying this out. For those of you who already have an entitlement to this, you can skip this this request for a trial. But for those of you who want to try this out, I recommend going to our website, navigating to Aria Operations, and from here we can actually start a free trial. So I'm going to show you a little bit of what that looks like. It's very straightforward. We enter in our name, email, etc., etc. It really only takes 5 minutes for us to actually fill this out. But once we do, what it's going to do is on the back end within VMware's cloud, it's going to spin up a vRealize Aria Operations instance that we can then access. Now, how do we access this instance? What we're going to do is we're going to have to go into our cloud services portal, which Alonzo had mentioned earlier. Once we're within our cloud services portal, we'll navigate to services. And this is where we can see all the different services that we just registered for. So one such service, which we're talking about today, is that vRealize Aria Operations Cloud instance. So all we need to do is press Launch Service. Once I do that, we'll see it already loaded here. Once I do that, I'm able to see my vRealize Operations instance. However, it's not connected to my on-prem environment just yet. So what we'll need to do is ensure that we are deploying that cloud proxy to broker that communication between on-prem as well as this cloud hosted instance. So the way that we can do that is we can go into data sources, into cloud proxies. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a new cloud proxy. Okay. So here we'll be able to see the different steps that you need to walk through. They make it very simple and very easily understandable for when you're going through this process. But what we're going to start off by doing is downloading, or in this case, we're going to copy the file path for that cloud proxy OVA. Then we're going to want to go into our vSphere environment. What we're going to want to do from here is deploy that OVA from template. Okay. We'll paste that file path, press next, accept that certificate. Now it will automatically generate a display name, but we're going to come up with something a little bit more friendly. We'll just call this vRealize Cloud Proxy.
Yep. A quick note on this naming, by the way, guys. So this is going to be the virtual machine name, but vRealize will automatically try to take this as its host name. So if you're creating, say, a DNS record, you want to make sure that the host name or the DNS record matches this name that you're giving it here.
Yes, thank you for that input, Alonzo. Great call out. We're also going to select the destination, the hardware destination for this cloud proxy. Okay. And review some of the details here. Accept the licensing agreements. In this case, we're going to deploy a small cloud proxy. You can see what the recommendations, what the sizing requirements are for the small cloud proxy and the standard cloud proxy, right? We are certainly going to be looking at a lab environment that is less than 8,000 VMs, so we can get away with the small cloud proxy. We'll select my data store cluster. Select next. We'll select the network that we want to have this reside on, which is going to be ESXi management for us.
And we will want to pick an internet facing one, right? Or one where, of course, since we'll be connecting outbound via 443, one that has access to the SaaS environment. Yeah.
Thank you for that comment there, Alonzo. Now, what we're going to need here is the unique registration key. Now, you might have noticed that in the previous tab, we do have that unique registration key. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy that key. Mm-hmm. And we're going to paste it here. Right. Come up with a friendly name for this instance. Just call it vRealize CP, vRealize Cloud Proxy. Okay. Mm-hmm. I am currently in, let's see here, Pacific time zone.
Could pretend to be in Europe.
Yeah, so, I want to match my remote console.
Yeah. One quick note while Joe's finding that as well. So that one-time key that Joe copied, you'll notice that there was a data persistence option. Now, Joe, in this case, left it off. What that data persistence option is, if you toggle it on, is it's going to allow the cloud proxy to continue collecting data, even if it loses access to the SaaS platform. So, for instance, if your on-prem environment loses connectivity to the SaaS platform, we will still be able to collect. Now, an important thing to note, and it calls it out right here, you will want to use it'll create a different one-time key once you activate this. So since we enable data persistence now, we'll want to copy a new key, the one that was just regenerated, instead of that old key before. Both are completely valid options. It really just depends on your particular needs on as far as if the cloud proxy loses connectivity.
Yeah, thank you, Alonzo, for that call out. Certainly would recommend using that data persistence if we are concerned about potential interruptions across data centers, right? Now, one of the other things that this is going to require is an NTP server. Since this is just a lab environment, we're going to use a publicly provided NTP server. So pull here. Paste this within my environment. We're not going to be using IPv6, right? We're also going to opt out of using the network proxy settings. We want to make sure we don't have any lingering passcodes that might confuse the system. All right. Some other information that we are able to select, but for right now, we're going to keep it fairly straightforward. We're going to avoid some of these more advanced settings and only show you guys really what we need to focus on. This is where we get to the network properties. Copy and paste in here some of my default gateways. I'm going to put in my subnet mask. Press next. As well as press finish. Okay. So this is going to take some time to deploy, and we will give it a little bit of time to deploy up here.
Okay, so the vRealize Operations Cloud proxy has been successfully deployed and is now up and running. We can actually launch the web console, and we'll be able to see that the connection is indeed successful. And if we navigate to vRealize Operations, we'll notice that under Cloud Proxies, we can see the vRealize Operations Cloud proxy is up and running. It is online, and it has been successfully connected. Now, once vRealize Operations Cloud Proxy is deployed, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add an account to it. So what we'll do is we'll jump into integrations, we'll press add account. And this is where we can start to actually collect information via the cloud proxy on our vCenter environment. So we'll come up with a friendly name for this. We'll just call it vCenter. We can add a description here if we want. And this is where we'll also select or we'll also type out our vCenter credentials here. I'm going to put the actual vCenter URL. We're also going to add in our credentials. Something of note, you won't be able to just type right into this field. You have to click the plus arrow, and we'll add in new credentials, and we'll call this administrator. We'll provide the main name. We can also optionally add in an actions username as well as an actions password. However, we don't need to do that because the administrator credential does have an ability to perform actions. Right? So it is an optional step. It's something that you can certainly add in if you want. From here, we will select the collector group, and that collector is that vRealize Operations Cloud proxy that we just deployed. Okay, We'll validate the connection here. It'll prompt us to review and accept the certificate. We'll hit accept.
Okay.
Okay, and we can see that the test connection was successful. Press OK. Now we will see a couple different options down here. These, in my opinion, are the main options that we want to focus on. The first is, do we want to have real-time monitoring? So this is something that we can activate. It means that vRealize Operations Cloud will collect data every 20 seconds. Normally, it'll collect data at longer intervals than that, somewhere around 3 minutes. So if you do want to have that continuous monitoring and that real-time monitoring, we can toggle this on or off. Typically, I find that most people prefer to leave it off just because it's less traffic across their network. We can also toggle on and off different operational actions. And now what this essentially means is, do we want to provide vRealize and operations the ability to execute different actions against our vCenter, such as resizing different workloads, powering things on and off, vMotioning things around within our environment. And typically this is something that I prefer to leave turned on. There are additional advanced settings. I find that for the vast majority of customers that I encounter, we can leave most of these by their defaults and will not encounter any issues. Right? So with that, we're going to press add. And now we can see that under the accounts, we have connected to our vCenter. You will notice that there is a warning status and that the state is started, but the status is none. It just takes a couple minutes for this to turn from warning into collecting.
Yeah, and just one quick added note there, Joe. Thank you. To everybody is, so the collection for vRealize Operations, there's a knowledge base article on that. It's 67792. But essentially that typical collection from an endpoint is every 5 minutes from the source. However, with near real-time monitoring, which Joe just called out there, vCenter metrics and metrics that vCenter collects can be obtained at 20-second intervals rather than at 5-minute intervals. Where this makes sense is when doing things such as profiling and more intensive monitoring of specific VMware workloads. That said, vCenter already does average and peak values for those 20-second data points, and then provides the 5-minute peak or average to VROps already. That's why most customers don't actually need that granular data passing through the network, is because vCenter already does a statistical, shall we say, calculation on those data points.
Yes, thank you for adding a bit more color there, Alonzo. Appreciate it. Okay, at this point, we can see that the status is now okay. We are collecting information from our vCenter. Let's jump into home and let's start to poke around the tool itself just to see the different types of information that is starting to populate within here. We don't see anything quite yet from the operations overview, aside from just some of the regions, the regional data centers starting to populate within here. What I like to look at oftentimes is recommendations. This is a good place where we can start to see information coming over. So we'll see the different data centers that we are now recognizing, see the different compute resources, the different hosts, as well as the different virtual machines. You'll notice that a lot of these objects are still grayed out, classified as unknown. As we let this run, it'll start to categorize the different healths and well-beings of these objects as either critical or normal or having some sort of immediate or warning alerts that we might need to address. So that's something that typically we like to let this tool run for 24 hours, but we'll start to notice that information is populating in less time than that. So with that, it completes the installation and configuration of vRealize Operations Cloud and its subsequent cloud proxy. Alonzo, is there anything else that you want to add here?
No, from a perspective of connection, that is typically the biggest question is how do I connect this SaaS service to my on-premises environment? And this is really that way to do that in a secure way is through this cloud proxy deployment that we just did, the onboarding of a vCenter adapter, the creation of a vCenter adapter, using the cloud proxy as our collection point, and then the ongoing collection of our environment. The last step typically from a configuration standpoint that I would typically do with my customers when we're reviewing things is to turn on cost settings by setting that US dollar or basically setting a particular currency. That way we can actually quantify not just how much memory and CPU are we using in the environment, but how much does it actually cost me based on the hardware spend that I have to make every hardware refresh, for instance, to actually host the workloads that run on top.
There's a good call out. Thank you, Alonzo. Whenever you first deploy vRealize Operations, you will see a ribbon across the top of the homepage that says you need to update your currency settings. You can either follow the link that's provided on that ribbon, or you can go into administration within global settings. Under cost and price, you can see where you can set that currency. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Hopefully this was useful for you guys. And until next time, you all have a great day.